Welcome back, everyone. Today we've got an unboxing for something that is going to be an interesting thing to test. And that is this Cooler Master MASTERAIR MA624 Stealth. And let's look at what it is before we talk about why it's exciting. So this is a 140 millimeter fan dual tower cooler. We appear to have, for the back here, a 6 heat pipe design. We're using Noctua's sickle flow fans. There's 2 of them. Supposed to be quiet optimization. I mentioned it's a dual tower heat sink with Cooler Master's easy mounting system. So on paper, and even at retail, this is fairly comparable to Noctua's D15. In fact, I have a D15 on our test bench. So we're going to review it stacked up against the D15 when we get to it. In the meantime, though, let's just get this thing out of the box and talk about what we do and don't have. So we've got wide coverage of CPU sockets, everything from 1151 and 1155 up through LGA 1366, 2011, and 2066 on the Intel side, and a couple of others in between. On the AMD side, we've got FM1, FM2, 3, AM2, 3, 3+4. Compatibility. There's probably a couple more sockets this is technically compatible with that aren't listed here. I know Intel hadn't changed their mounting in a while, so the fact that it works with 1151 and 1155, it may be possible to mount it on like an old 775 board. Not that I would suggest you should go buy a brand new cooler for a 775 system unless you're doing some XOC madness. Beyond that, pretty clear, black, no RGB. Looks like we get a fun mounting plate. Let's get it out of the box. So it says 240 millimeter fans, an optional 120 millimeter RAM clearing fan. So that's one way to guarantee RAM clearance. I wonder if the third fan is included, which would be great. There are full details on the fans themselves. Says we get a 5-year warranty. So let's get a look at what's in the box. So we get what I assume is a hardware kit. That appears to be at least one fan. And then the tower itself. So here is the that's interesting. Why won't it release? There's a silica gel packet. Here's our MA624. Very cleanly milled looking cold plate. Looks like the screws are actually pre-installed inside the tower. So we've got our spring-loaded screws. Second and third fans. Okay. So there's the 120 millimeter fan you'd use if you needed to clear memory. Here's our 140 millimeter fan we'd install typically. Design looks fairly symmetrical, so my immediate concern would have been the fact that the internal fan is already mounted, and I don't see the airflow marker on it. Although I can probably figure out which way it is based on... Oh, okay, so it should be on the side. And it looks like, if they look like that... Okay, so the airflow direction is like that by default. So we'd have airflow this way. That's pretty straightforward once I found it. Anyway, what I was getting at is in the D15, because the fan wasn't pre-installed inside the cooler assembly, I could flip the fan around if I put the cooler on backwards, although it looks like if I take these screws out, that fan should slide out. Inside here we get our mounting hardware. This is fiberglass. Yeah, some form of fiberglass reinforced plastic. No mark on it to tell me exactly which one, but that should be plenty heat resistant. It's almost got a metallic finish to it, like it's sintered metal instead. That sure as hell sounds like fiberglass, though. I'm gonna have to ask what exactly this backplate. That is metal. That is some form of metal. Either way, backplate isn't going to melt, which is good. We get some warranty information on here. English. All bulk packaging comes with a 1-year limited warranty, which this is a bulk package. This is retail package, which appears to have a 5-year warranty per the box. Oh yeah. Guarantees the device is free of defect material, workmanship, 5-year limited hardware warranty for the device commencing from the date of purchase. Please keep your receipt for proof of purchase. Well, I don't have one of those. I actually won this, technically. We have a little manual here. And I'm going to pick on Cooler Master's manual for a couple of things really quick off the gate. Number one, the order they show some of this happening in is just all sorts of weird. So, step 3, Intel and AMD shows me peeling the plastic and putting thermal paste on, but I'm not putting the back plate on the board until step 4, which I wouldn't want to put the thermal paste on the CPU until I had put the back plate on. I think, I don't want to touch the paste while I'm doing that. The rest of this seems fine, but this step here really should be after these brackets are installed, but before I put down the tower. The other thing, and then we go into LGA 2011, 1156, 2066. Okay, so, yep. All of that works out. What do we get included? So we get some little plastic clips that go to this based on which type of socket you're working with. We get a tiny, tiny tube of Master Gel Pro. And let's see if I can find something really quick. So, I think it's the same amount of paste, roughly. But this is the tube Noctua gives you with with the D15, and this is the tube Cooler Master is giving me with an MA624. And I know I keep comparing the two; they're roughly in the same price bracket, and I expect similar performance out of the two. But Cooler Master, we should have at least gotten the bigger tube of thermal paste. This just doesn't feel like the tube that belongs in a premium product. This feels like the tube that belongs in $20 Chinese heatsink from a manufacturer that vanishes the day after you order it. The rest of this, I mean, nice looking metal brackets to go with the mounting plate, which in hindsight is definitely some form of injection molded, God, what do they use here? There's an aluminum zinc that gets used for this kind of stuff, and I think that's what this actually is. Nice screwdriver. One thing I would love to see on this style screwdriver, and this is not just aimed at Cooler Master because Noctua uses the same one. If I can find it. There it is. So here's Noctua's. In fact, these very well may have come out of the same factory that Cooler Master and Noctua just went and ordered them from. The only real distinction between them is it looks like the one that came with the D15 is half an inch longer. Not that either of these shouldn't be interchangeable, but anyway. There's no Phillips on the short end, and there are definitely occasions where, like, if someone really cranked this down, it would be beneficial to be able to use the additional length of this driver for extra torque, especially when you're uninstalling things. So I would love to see that start being a feature. Let's finish this stuff first. So here's our typical PWM-Y cable, and this is only a 2-to-1, not a 3-to-1. Our assortment of mounting hardware for installing our brackets and everything else. And it looks like it comes with some sort of odd-looking tools. Okay, so for AMD mounting, these go underneath. Then this goes on your motherboard side, and then this tightens down. AMD. So for Intel mounting, so I still use these, and the way these work is for an LGA 1200, this goes here. And then these odd little plastic clips clip on like that. I'm not a huge fan of that particular design. I would have rather just have screws that go through the board, but I do appreciate some of what they've done here. So, and I hope this comes through on camera, there are 3 notches, and the innermost notch we don't use, and I would be unsurprised to find out if that wasn't a relic of the 755 era. This middle notch is for LGA 2011 and 1150 whatever, 1151, 1150, 55, etc. This outermost notch actually fits LGA 1366. So the assembly is the same on the Intel side no matter what. You just move this slightly, which allows you to move this screw in or out by about, and that's only a couple of millimeters, it's like 2 millimeters based on your board. So then we go through and we put all of these in. Like that. And then this would go on the underside of the board. And then once again, we do the same thing. This installs, and then this installs with those brackets, and then it's going to be the 2 screws in the tower that hold it in. Now there's a couple of things missing from this that I'm not a fan of, and also I think I flipped that over. No, I couldn't have flipped it over. Oh, I had this backwards. Okay. I don't see any double-sided mounting tape. In any of these, there's no mounting tape to like stick this to the back of your board. I'm probably going to use some. I've got some 3M VHB. I might get some cheaper tape just so it's not quite as permanent. Okay, and then these go on 2066, 2011, and 2011 V3, which is fairly common because server boards tend to have a steel backplate pre-installed. So these just thread into that, and then those thread in. All right, anyway, I don't want this backplate slipping around while I'm trying to line the cooler up. So that's just me being particular. All right, so let's go ahead and take this top cover off. At least I think I can take the top cover off. That's just spinning. Oh, how do you... Did it just pop off? I see some clips. Okay, I'm not a fan of this process already. So, the good news is this is removable. And the reason I wanted to see if this was removable was threefold. Number one, people have tried to cram these coolers into cases that they don't quite fit in fairly often. And typically the reason for that is that, you know, you want to cram a giant tower cooler in an ITX case. And the typical method by doing that, at least for the Cooler Master coolers, is by removing this top plate. And so I wanted to see how difficult that was to remove. I wanted to see how difficult it would be to do that in the event that this fan ever failed. And on the off chance that you somehow install this backwards, I wanted to see how difficult it was to just pop this out and flip the fan around instead of remounting the whole CPU cooler. So it's not impossible. There are these little wedge-shaped clips that do just pop out, given a little bit of force. However, and I don't think I did. Yeah, I did. I bent this one. Doing so, you're very likely to at least compress these top three fins. And it's not impossible to unclip it, but it doesn't feel good for a premium product to have to go through that. Now, the alternative is more screws, or using these screws to hold it in, which would require that these have a slightly different retention mechanism, but all in all wouldn't be the end of the world. So that's not impossible, although what I don't like, now that I'm in, is the mechanism actually used to hold this fan in. So there's just these little wedge-shaped pins that hold the fan into the top here. So there's no screws, there's no vibration dampening. This is just a hard assembly. And this whole thing is just, we've got one plastic injection mold, and then this top section is just a thin aluminum veneer that is bonded to it. So, all right. Anyway, so it is possible to flip this around. And just out of curiosity, are these in fact 100% the same? Yeah, these are just both Sickle Flow 140s with the same production date stamped on them, which is good. I wonder... Not that I would say this is generally worth doing, but if for whatever reason... Let's grab grab one that would have crap screwed too. Or I guess that's crap screwed to both of them, so let's just take it off really quick. If for whatever reason one of these 140s failed, and the best option was not to reinstall a Sickle Flow 140. And the reason I phrase it that way is because ideally you would contact Cooler Master or buy the same fan and just drop it in, and then it would not behave as intended. But if you needed to do it right away, and let's say you, like me, had an Arctic 140 sitting on the shelf, you know, I need this system back up today. Okay, well, what fans do I have? Does this fit? The answer is no. These holes don't line up at all, and I think the reason for that is these Sickle Flow 140s use a 120 millimeter mounting pattern. So I could take my Sickle Flow 120 and cram it in. No problem. And that's got some vibration pads on it, which actually might be quieter, although obviously you're not going to get nearly as much coverage through the tower by doing so. But a typical off-the-shelf 140 millimeter fan is not going to fit. Now that doesn't mean that there's no fans that fit. And the reason I say that is I know certain fans, do I have one here? I don't have one. Like Noctua's 150 millimeter fans that go on the D15 actually don't have like 150 millimeter mounting. Now I don't know off the top of my head if those are 120 or 140 millimeter mounting screws, but it's entirely feasible that someone else makes something that fits this, just not my off-the-shelf Arctic P12s. Which is a bummer, but that's not Cooler Master's fault. They designed it to fit their fans, and that's fine. The choice to use 120 millimeter mounting on a 140 millimeter fan I find odd. But Sickle Flow 140s fit in a lot of places, so it's not the most uncommon thing either. The Arctics I have on the shelf just don't happen to be compatible with that. Alright, so I got that back in. Get that lined up. And I bent a fin again, putting it back in. Okay, and then this is my 140. This is the 120. It looks like this is a pretty easy swap to do. Although, you guys could have done this part a little better. So this is the 140 millimeter fan that comes for the second fan. However, if you run into RAM clearance issues, you're encouraged to use this 120, which uses the same mounting mechanism. And in order to do that, I don't know if they show it in the manual, but it's just a couple of screws. Yeah. So they show you taking off this foam pad and then taking out all 4 screws, and then doing the whole process backwards. The problem is the adhesive on this foam pad is A, pretty stiff, and B, probably not going to stick back to that when I go and do it again. And I don't appear to have replacement foam pads in the box. So I would have encouraged Cooler Master to, instead of using a foam pad like this, just use a slightly larger foam pad with a hole punched in the center that the screw could pass through. And that would have allowed me to move from this to this without any fuss. All right. What else do I have? I wish it had come with a second set of these, because although it may not make a huge difference, there are definitely people who would like to use a 3-fan combo on this, and I'm going to be asking Cooler Master if they have additional fan brackets available for this, so that you could buy a Sickle Flow 140, which is just an off-the-shelf fan, and throw it in there, no problem. Or maybe you do want to use this 120 that's already here, and if you can pick these up for another $5, go for it. Add a third fan, and then you just need a 3-to-1 PWM splitter, which either Cooler Master sells or there's plenty of on Amazon. That's probably one other thing they could have done differently here, is instead of needing to include a splitter, and this is something that I encourage companies who make fans to adopt. Don't think it's patented, and I know Arctic uses the hell out of it, is this PST cable. It doesn't cost a whole ton extra, and like I said, it's not proprietary. I can plug any other fan into this, but this lets me chain the fans together without having to use one of these adapter cables and go on with that. Right. So anyway, that's the MA624, at least what's in the box. We're going to be putting it on our test bench in the future here. I do want to talk a little bit about how we're going to do that. And you're going to see this referenced in a couple of other videos going forward. And what we're going to do is I actually have a couple of Innovation Cooling graphite thermal pads. And we're going to do 3 things basically. I'm gonna unbox those, obviously. That'll probably be a quick video. This is already almost 30 minutes long. Talk about the graphite for a little bit, but anyway, so I'm gonna bench the D15 as it is with the NTH1 that came in the box. And then I'm going to take it off. I've got some pressure paper that I'm going to try and get a visual representation of its contact form. And then I'm going to bench it with the graphite thermal pad. That does 2 things. Number 1, that'll be the review of the graphite thermal pad. Number 2, that gives me a baseline for how the graphite compares to, say, the Master Gel or any other in-box premium thermal compound. Number 2, that'll let me then review the MA624 with an identical thermal interface material application. And the reason for that is that when I benchmark this thing, I want to remove as many variables as possible. I don't want my application of a different thermal paste, because I don't have enough NTH1 to play back and forth with coolers. I don't want my application of thermal paste to be an issue between the coolers. So I'm going to use the graphite thermal pad because that does not change. There's no room for error there. It's either installed or it's not. This will test with 1 fan, with the second 140, and with the 120. And obviously we'll do acoustics and thermals for all of those. I'm leaning towards using OCCT for the thermal loads. If you guys have something else you'd like to see, let me know in the comments below. And we can use more than one. ATA64 is another one I've looked at as an option as well. All right. Anyway, one thing I forgot to do was weigh this thing. So I've got my scale here. We are... Come on, 0 out. All right, we are zeroed out. We are set to grams. I have the fans pulled out. I am going to leave this little shim of plastic just so I don't scratch or damage the cold plate, but I just want to see. So I have 886 grams of mass total, and what that tells me is not necessarily the cooler's ability to cool, but how much material there is to absorb heat before we start to see things like the fans ramping up, where I could build two coolers, one dual tower cooler and one single tower cooler, that cooled exactly the same, and both were capable of keeping a CPU under a certain thermal threshold. The larger cooler is going to have the benefit of potentially being able to run its fans slower and taking longer before they ramp up, just because there's more material to absorb that heat in the first place than the smaller cooler. So 886, that's a pretty respectable amount of metal. I'll weigh the D15 when I do the thermal tests, because I don't remember what that weighs off the top of my head, and I don't think I wrote it down. So that'll tell me which one of these weighs more, and just give me a little bit of insight into their ability to soak heat without necessarily having to have the fans ramp up. As always, I want to say thank you for anyone who helps support Pocketables, either via Patreon or Amazon affiliate links. It's support like that that helps make videos like this possible. I want to thank Electrix for providing our opening and closing themes. I do want to comment that this was not sent in by Cooler Master. Well, it was sent in by Cooler Master PR, but not as a review item. I actually won this in a contest, which is cool. And you should check out their Discord, which there'll be a link into below. But this isn't a PR unit. I just happen to be someone who's going to tear it apart piece by piece for 30 minutes. So anyway, with that all out of the way, thank you for watching.